Hey, today I want to talk about pull-ups and how you can get better at pull-ups, how I have approached getting better at pull-ups and improving that for my chest to bars. It plays into all your gymnastics pulling movements, what to focus on when you're trying to improve that. So the biggest thing for me that I see, and this isn't the only issue, but one of the bigger issues I see for people when they're trying to get a pull-up, get better at pull-ups, build volume in pull-ups, all that kind of thing, is just how they move their body in the movement. And what I mean by that is a lot of times they'll go up, they'll grab onto the bar, and they just start pulling. And they pull and they pull. And a lot of times people will get stuck about here, right? And the reason, one of the reasons why you get stuck here is because you've ran out of room for your bicep to pull you up, right? I can't squeeze this anymore. It's done, right? How do I get without doing the chicken neck thing? But if you actually want to improve your pull up, you need to learn and teach your body how to use this big guy back here, your lats and all the muscles supporting that. But I focus on your lats. Okay, it's the easiest way to do it for my brain anyways. And the best way to do this is going to be practicing engaging that lat first. Okay, so I term this as like pull your shoulder down away from your ear. Now it's not like pop my chest open either. We need to keep integrity, right, through the rest of our core and connecting ourselves into the body, especially when you're doing kipping movements, or if you go into like muscle ups and things like that. Especially, it becomes really important that you keep everything connected. When you guys are doing this, it's maintaining that lat activation, and it's much easier to establish it at the beginning of the movement. Once you learn how to do it, it's much easier to do it at the first onset of the movement, as opposed to pulling to here and then going, oh, right, I need to use my lat, and then engaging the lat and getting that hand down where you potentially need it for even a chest to bar or definitely that pull-up position, okay, to make that nice and very clear and obvious. You need to get that lat engaged because your bicep cannot pull you down anymore, okay? You have to get this elbow down. Ways to do this, I would highly suggest like a cable machine is a great one because you can load it in, varying different difficulties. You can go wider hands, you can play with a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. So that's a really great tool to be able to utilize. A lot of us may not have access to that. So your other option would be something sort of like a band of some kind. And that can be any sort of band. I have ones that are just big long loops, and you can tie them on anything that you can essentially get yourself into an overhead position. So that may be where you tie it off on a pole. Make sure the pole is going to stay there. So when you pull on it, I've seen this on Instagram a couple times. They pull on it and then it comes down and smacks them in the head. Please don't do that. I don't want you to get hit in the head when you do this. Make sure it's a sturdy pole, like it's a part of a rig, or it's a telepost in the basement, or something that when you yank on this thing, because that's what you're going to do, that pole's not gonna move when I pull the elastic band. But you're essentially going to get yourself, so if you're doing it that way, you'll have to hinge over into that so you can get that overhead position, and then practicing engaging that lat down and pulling down with that lat still engaged, meaning you're going to maintain that space between your ear and your shoulder. Okay, it's easier said than done. So you can do it that way, in that kind of bent over into an overhead position. Or if you have something to tie off above you, then you can do it standing. You may have to sit. For me, I've got a very low rig, so I sit down and do it. But again, it's that make sure that you're activating the shoulder down, okay, and then maintaining that through the whole thing. So you may, if you're very close, you may be able to just pull and go and maintain that position of that shoulder back and down. But you may need to slow it down as well, and make sure, like, and pause, like, oh, my shoulder popped up again. I need to pause and slowly. And then the other side of this is also, can you maintain that shoulder down as your hand goes back up? Okay. And you may need to slow things down a little bit to teach your body to do this, because your default may be, oh yeah, I scap pull up, as I call it, term it, to get that shoulder down. And then I start pulling, but then as soon as I get to the tough part, my shoulder rolls back up. And now I'm doing that same bicep curl with the chicken net thing. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is learning and teaching your body how to use that lat properly and keep it engaged through the movement on the way as you're pulling, but also as you're coming down, and then setting for your next one, right? And that becomes even more important when we go into things like kipping, so that we can keep that shoulder packed down and in a really safe position, as opposed to having it up here and just swinging off of your ligaments and everything in your shoulder, which is not good. We want to have a nice, compact and active shoulder while we're moving through. It's really also hard to swing when you've got your shoulder up by your ear like this. Okay, so we want to be able to keep that down and keep that lat engaged, so that we can have that position. You can work on it in other positions as well, like when you're doing, say, like a bent over row or a ring row or something like that, making sure that you're not doing your ring row here or your bent over row here. Make sure, again, you've got your shoulders back and down, which does not mean pop your chest and your rib cage open. Okay, it's just your shoulders. And then pulling there, and you can even, like, you may have to slow it down and deload it a little bit to teach your body to do this. When I went and I did a gymnastics course years ago, the instructor said, okay, when we go to warm up and improve our weightlifting, what do? You start with an empty bar, right? And then you slowly, progressively add weight and you build up. Right? We don't just go and be like, oh, I want to snatch 225 today. And you don't just load on 225 and just keep trying it until you make it, right? It doesn't work that way. You build up to it. You may have to, stay at lighter weights, perfect some movement, or you may have to stay at lighter weights and get your body used to that before you go to the next weight, etc. Gymnastics typically is approached from very different of like, oh, do a pull-up, just try it. Right? And we all just jump up there and just start trying to do pull-ups. And it's like, oh, not really. If you think about, you can approach gymnastics the same way you do weightlifting, in the sense of deload the movement and teach your body how to move properly, right? So get some bands out and get that shoulder taught how to stay down through the entire movement, both up and down. Once you've done that, then you can graduate to a bigger band, thicker band, or just grab higher on the band. Will make it harder too. You don't necessarily need multiple bands. You can just grab a little higher, and do it that way too. Or add weight onto your cable machine, right? But you might not be able to just jump up on the rig and start practicing, okay? You can also do this if you can get yourself in a position where you can grab onto the rig and then have some sort of assistance from your feet on a box or something to that degree and assist you through it. But again, your main thing is to maintain that shoulder down, okay? And the one trick in the way that I think about the pull-up, when I think about doing a pull-up, I'm not pulling my chin over the bar. I mean, technically yes, but that's not what I'm thinking about, right? I'm thinking about my elbow and my lat, right? And I engage, and then I pull my elbow down to my hip is actually what I'm doing, right? Because in order to pull this down, what do I need to engage? What's going to pull my elbow down? It's going to be that lat and the muscles of my shoulder. My bicep's not going to help me with pulling this down, but my bicep will help me in the sense of getting me closer or pulling my hand down, right? That's where we get caught a lot of times, is that, oh, I just have to grab this thing and pull myself up there, and you just use your bicep basically entirely, okay? And that also puts a lot of stress on your bicep, injuries, all sorts of stuff. So I like to think about the elbow coming down as opposed to the hand. If I get the elbow down and in the right spot, I will always do a pull-up every single time, right? I have no other options. Look where my hand is, right? It's in the right spot. It's way down here, right? Chest to bar changed a little bit. You may have to kind of think about down and back slightly, right? A little bit of a tweak to that movement there. But essentially, if I'm thinking about my elbow down, I'm going to be able to get a pull-up for sure if I can maintain that position through the whole range of motion. So again, deload the movement and practice. And don't move on until you can do it basically every time, right? And then at that point, you can go ahead and make it tougher. But for a lot of people to be able to just jump up on the rig and just be like, oh, just use your lats. It doesn't really work out very well usually. We need to be okay with taking that step back, deloading the movement, and teaching and practicing and ingraining this movement. This is the way the body does it, and it's not the old way of the shoulder popping up and losing, that lat in the movement. We need to keep that guy active in order to get that pull up go in the right direction and to have more success and to build on it more, right? Your lat is way bigger than your bicep is or ever will be, right? There's a lot more potential in your lat than there is in your bicep for growth, for endurance, all of those things. Another part of this is going to be how far apart your hands need to be, or should they be, or what's comfortable. It is dependent on the person to a degree. Having said that, I find, very much personally, I find this the case, that it is easier to maintain good shoulder position and achieve the required range of motion for any movement I'm doing in the gymnastics, pulling movements of, if it's toes to the bar, if it's chest to bars, if it's bar muscle ups, all of them, I have the same hand grip width for all of the movements. It allows me to activate my lats and the muscles in my shoulders properly to get me in the right position. And it also allows me the space to get into the position without having to fight past my hands. So for me, it's a little bit wider than shoulder width. I'm up over top, grab onto the bar. Now the reason why it's a little bit wider, right, is because if I'm narrow and I'm straight up from my shoulders and I go to do a chest to bar, it's going to be really hard. Even if I'm, out here, it's going to be really hard to get my chest through, and see how far back I have to get my elbows now behind me, versus if I have my hands out a little wider. Yes, this is going to make you use your lats more, but you just learn how to use them properly, hopefully. So now this is hopefully going to be a little bit easier with your hands out there to engage the lats, pull, okay? Now, for a chest to bar, right, it's not this way back here, it's here, right? And it's that lat that's getting me there. So generally speaking, I like to see people have their hands a little bit wider than their shoulders. So you've got room, when you go to do muscle ups and all that kind of stuff, you've got room to get your body through between your hands, essentially, okay? And it's not mandatory. I just personally find this to be helpful. And the big piece of this is, if you don't know how to use your lats, this is going to be extremely difficult to have your hands this far apart. I like having my hands a little bit wider than shoulder width. Again, requires a lot more lat activation and understanding and knowing in the body, knowing how to activate and maintain that position. If you don't know how to activate your lats, you will not do a pull-up way out with your hands way out there. It will be much more difficult. Learn that with the band and deloaded, all that kind of thing, or lightly loaded, and build into it, okay, to teach those shoulders and those lats how to work together. To work your way towards this, if you're on the band, it's honestly like, just grab the band, do sets of 10. You can do it with both hands at the same time. You can do it with one hand at a time if you want to really like hone in on just the one arm. Maybe is where you need to start, where it's just like, I can't think about both arms at the same time. I need to just do one and then the other. And then maybe you do both once you kind of figured them out individually, and then we can increase the weight or the tension, yada, 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 etc., etc. You can do this. If it's with the band, it's just like practice, right? Take 5 minutes and just go practice. Do 5 to 10 reps, take a break, and just repeat that over 3, 4, or 5 times, whatever you got time for. Practice that. If you want more structure to it, and a way that you can later build without having to change the structure of it, I love doing gymnastics EMOMs. It's probably one of my favorite things to do, especially strict movements. But you just basically pick a number. Once you get to a point where there is a type of pull-up you can do multiple reps worth of, right? Maybe not all at once, but I can do like singles 4, 5, 6 times. Then just every minute, I do it on an EMOM, every minute, do a pull-up, right? A strict pull-up. And then next week, you add a round. And the week after, you add a round. And you keep adding around. And I usually start somewhere around 6 rounds worth, okay? And then I'll build all the way up to like potentially 10. Once you get to 10, there's a pretty good chance you can probably bring down the rounds that you're doing and increase the reps now. So you can bump that up to 2. Don't get crazy, go to 2, okay? This is all about building success and building good patterns over and over and over and over and over again, okay? This really isn't about the total number. It's just about like patterning really good movement. So focusing on that part of it, not how many reps you're doing necessarily. But slowly over time, that will go up if you do it properly. And then, so now you're going to do 2 reps for 6 rounds. And then depending on how that feels, if it was like, this is too easy, then go to 3 reps for 6 rounds. Or if you got done to 2 and you're like, I barely made it, just add a round of doubles. And just add a round of doubles. And again, once you get to that 10, there's probably at that point a really good chance you can do some triples for hopefully 6 rounds, up to 6 rounds, and then 7 and 8, etc. And you can kind of just keep building it that way. And you can do this for as long as you really honestly want. I basically personally like having a gymnastics EMOM year round all the time. It's one of my things that I do usually on a Monday or a Tuesday when I'm not too tired. I haven't been beat up from the day before. I can put some really, really good effort and attention into the EMOM. And this gymnastics EMOM, for me personally, I usually have 3 movements in it, so you can kind of grow this into more movements and apply the exact same principles to more movements. I usually have a gymnastics pull. Lately, it's been a strict chest to bar for me, a strict pushing movement. So that might be a strict handstand push-up. It could be just regular push-ups. I've done that before where I'm just doing normal push-ups. I don't want to be banging my head on the floor for whatever reason that it may be. And I'll just do it with regular push-ups. That's totally doable as well. And then I usually will have some sort of core movement put in there as well. Typically, it's going to be strict toe to bar. Every once in a while, I'll do kipping toe to bar. You could put in V-snaps. You could put in a weighted sit-up. You could put in GHD sit-ups in there if you wanted to. But again, the whole thing here is not about doing them quickly. It's about doing them as perfect as you can. Okay? And even as a person who, I'm not at all the best at any of these movements, but I can do like my gymnastics EMOM, I'm doing 6 strict chest to bars, 7 strict wall facing handstand push-ups, and I usually do anywhere from 4 to 6 strict toe to bar and I do 1 movement per minute for 18 minutes. So I get 6 rounds worth, and I'm just gonna, again, just like I explained earlier, I'm either adding a round, or if that was really easy, I increase the reps and then add a round later on. And I'm only, as a rule for this, only increase reps by 1 ever, okay? You don't have to increase all 3 movements in the case of where I'm doing 3, or you may take that approach. You don't have to increase all 3, but increase either a rep or a round each week. Now, the only time that doesn't happen is if you do not complete all of the reps, which is going to happen at some point. As you just keep adding rounds and adding reps, at some point, you're not going to be able to keep up to this. And that will happen. It happens to me all the time. And then that's where I kind of reset, start over, and go again. But when that happens, you don't get to add anything. So for example, if I'm doing my 6 strict chest to bars, and my first 3 rounds are great, perfect, got them all done, unbroken, then I'll go and my 4th round, all of a sudden I only get 4 unbroken. And then I come down. For me personally, I just leave it at that, right? For me, again, with the focus being good, solid reps, I don't really want to do the other two because I feel like they may not be good. Within that minute, I'm going to be rushed and I'm going to jump back up there too early and I'm not going to be able to keep that perfect position. Potentially. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. That's just how I approach it. And that gives me the way that then it's like, okay, you can't handle this many pull-ups. So next week you repeat it over and you try to maybe get where, okay, the first 4 rounds, maybe the 5th round even, and now I just missed it on the last one. Redo it again, try to get all 6. Then once I've got all 6, then I can add a round or add reps, whichever seems to make more sense depending on how that felt. Now, that's not to say that you have to do it unbroken. That's just the way that I've always done it. I've always done it where it's got to be unbroken and they have to be the same number every time. It's got to be repeatable. Once it is unbroken and repeatable, then you can increase. But I know lots of people that have also had really good success in doing this where they have a number and they'll break it up a little bit and it still works really good potentially. I don't know. I literally have never done it that way. Just because for no reason really at all. Just I haven't. But I know that it's a very valid way of doing it as well, and you absolutely can get some really good practice even if you are breaking up the sets a little bit. For me, I think it's just easier to tell, well, I didn't do it unbroken, so then I know I have to redo it, right? And it gives me a chance of the next round I can come back and potentially do it a little bit better, right, than that I did on the other ones. Like I've done that before where I've gone and got 6, 4, 5 all of a sudden, and then it kind of will be weird and wonky, and that's fine too. That happens where it'll go up and down. But again, I didn't get all of them unbroken, so I'm not increasing anything the next week. Sorry, I do this once a week is all. You could probably do it twice. I wouldn't do it any more than that. Depends also what you're doing throughout your programming. I've only ever done it once a week. I've never done it twice a week. Again, just my personal preference, and I've still had really good success with it personally. But yeah, you could probably do it a couple times. You can start out, if you want to also give yourself a better chance, do it with all 3 movements because it gives you 3 minutes before you come back and do that movement again. Then you'll do your chest to bar, your pull up, your variation of push, and then your core, and then your back the next, minute 4, 5, 6, minute 7, 8, 9, and you go through it that way. Just gives you a little bit more rest. So if you want and need more rest to be able to repeat the effort, then cycle through 3 movements or 2 movements. Either way, you could add a 4th one in there if you can think something else, do pistols or something maybe, and just have a nice gymnastics EMOM for 20 minutes up to like half an hour. And you can do it that way. If you're getting really good at it, where I've gotten to points where I'm getting like 10 of everything, except for the strict total bar, I, for whatever reason, don't ever go above 6. Again, I don't know why, but I don't. But if you get to a position where you're doing like 8, 9, 10 sets of 10 on a pulling movement or a handstand push-up movement specifically, then you can make it much harder by doing all rounds of the pulling movement first. So if you're doing 6 rounds of all 3 movements of each, then you can do 6 rounds straight of your chest to bar, then go 6 rounds straight of your handstand push-ups, and then go 6 rounds straight of your core movement, total bar in this case for myself. And that increases the difficulty a lot when you're doing it back to back and you've got, the movement's going to take you 30 seconds. You've only got 30 seconds to rest before you're doing another set, right? That's going to be much more difficult than having 3 minutes before you come back around to it again. Okay, so that's another way that you can make it really difficult, or much more difficult, if you're hitting some really high numbers, and doing it that way. I've only ever done this as an EMOM, as every minute on the minute. You could probably do it like every 2 minutes and do all 3 movements if you really wanted to, and do it that way if you wanted to speed it up a little bit for yourself. There's a lot of different ways of changing it up and spinning it. If you're doing like all of the rounds of one movement in a row, in theory, you could be increasing one movement an extra round, but not increasing another movement an extra round potentially. I mean, you could, in theory, do that in the revolving way as well. You would just skip a movement once you got, it's like, okay, I've done my 6 rounds of handstand push-ups. Now I just do the other 2. Make those 2 a little harder because they're coming around a little quicker, but you could do it that way too. But yeah, lots of different ways. One of my favorite things to do in the gym is that gymnastics EMOM. I have found a lot of value in it for myself, for making the gymnastics much, much better. If I'm doing that EMOM, my gymnastics movements are always much better. Even my kipping, I usually keep that strict, the EMOM, but even it helps all of my kipping movements as well. All those numbers go up as the strict ones go up, which really shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But if it is, you're welcome. There's your surprise. Do the strict stuff, and even your kipping will get better too. So yeah, that's probably a very long-winded explanation of all of that, but that's kind of in the pull-up itself, getting better at it, just how to physically do a pull-up. Pay attention to the elbow and pull it down. Make sure that the shoulder is staying down through the entire movement. Remember, you can deload gymnastics movements and still get good at them. You don't have to just jump up with your body weight and try it, right? Grab a band, get someone to spot you, spot yourself off of a box, all that kind of stuff. Super beneficial for just perfecting the movement itself and how it gets done and how your body sequences the movement, and making sure that that's really driven home before you go in and load up the movement with your body, or potentially adding weight to it with vest and all those other things. So making sure you're doing that. Gymnastics EMOM once a week, or gymnastics strict work once a week, however you want to put it together, I think is super valuable and is going to be super beneficial. And you can do that when you have the movements, or you can also do it with the scaled variations of it, where you're doing maybe the pull-up with a band, handstand push-ups with your feet on a box, and you're maybe just doing regular good old-fashioned sit-ups, which there's nothing wrong with those. You can still do an EMOM with those. Just because you're not doing chest to bar, wall-facing handstand push-ups and strict toe to bar, doesn't mean you can't do an EMOM. You can absolutely do an EMOM with the version of the movement that fits you, and build that and just keep adding. And yeah, that's kind of the main ones for this one. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully you like this one. If you're into these kind of more training ones as opposed to the mindset videos, let me know. If there's a movement that you'd like me to go over and talk about, let me know.